Welcome to the Fit Rich Life podcast, a show about building a life you absolutely love. A big part of building a life you love involves meaning and purpose. On today's show, we have Jordan Grumet, author of the new book, The Purpose Code: How to Unlock Meaning, Maximize Happiness, and Leave a Lasting Legacy. This is the best book I've read on purpose. In this episode, here are some things you'll learn about. 1. Why focusing on little p purpose versus big P purpose will create a better life experience. 2. The difference between meaning and purpose and why they're both important to happiness. 3. How to make sure you're on the right climb in your life, and a whole lot more. This is a great episode for anyone who wants to live a more purposeful life. Please enjoy a wide-ranging conversation with Jordan Grumet. Jordan, it's so good to have you back on the show, brother.
Justin, it's great to be talking to you again.
So for the audience, Jordan Grumet, aka Doc G, he was on episode 33 of the Fit Rich Life podcast, formerly Alchemized Life. And this year in January, he released the new book, The Purpose Code: How to Unlock Meaning, Maximize Happiness, and Leave a Lasting Legacy. He's also the host of the Earn and Invest podcast, which is one of my favorite podcasts to listen to. He's a public speaker, storyteller, hospice doctor. And in preparation for this interview, I re-listened to our last conversation, and that we talked about your previous book, Taking Stock. And we recorded this towards the end of 2022. And interestingly enough, we talked a lot about purpose, being on the climb, happiness, and a lot of things I found in your new book. So you've obviously been thinking about this a lot. Tell me about the genesis of your new book, The Purpose Code. Like, how did it come about?
Well, basically, I was having these conversations with people like you about my last book. So I'm a hospice doctor, and I wrote about what the dying can teach us about money and life. And a big key part of that was that we should probably be putting purpose, identity, and connections first. So instead of just chasing money, we should think about what looks like purpose in our life and then build a financial framework around it. But then I went and gave a bunch of talks about this. I marketed the book. I talked to podcasters like you, and a number of people came up to me, especially at these conferences, and some of them would be kind of angry. And they'd be like, you keep on telling me to find my purpose, and I don't know what my purpose is. And the first time this happened, I'm like, okay, this is a one-off, but it happened over and over again. And so I did a deep dive into purpose, and it both confirmed some of my thoughts, but also surprised me. So how did it confirm my thoughts? Tons of studies out there show that having a sense of purpose in life leads to health, happiness, and longevity. There are tons of studies. On the other hand, I also found other studies, specifically one by Larissa Rainey, that showed that 90% of people have at some point in their life something called purpose anxiety. This idea that trying to find your purpose actually makes you stressed and depressed and unhappy. And so this was a big question to me. How can purpose both be the most important thing, but as well be a huge cause of anxiety? I call that the purpose paradox. And what I realized is that probably purpose isn't one thing, but two. And there's probably like a really good version of purpose that brings you that health, happiness, and longevity, and a more negative version of purpose that gives you anxiety. And so I set out to write this book to help make it tangible and straightforward. Because whenever you and I or anyone talks about purpose, we get really anxious because it feels ephemeral and difficult and hard to pin down. And I'm a financial independence guy, so I'm used to talking about finances. And we get really good at pinning finances down and giving people the exact directions they need to take. I'm like, why isn't purpose like this? And that's why I wrote the book, The Purpose Code.
Yeah. And one of the things I love about your book so much is it really is, in essence, like a manual for creating purpose in your life. It gives you like a framework or a formula that you can follow in order to create purpose in your life. And, you know, just like we follow a formula to achieve financial independence, like there's a mathematical formula. And like, I honestly, Jordan, I think this is a revolutionary book because I've like read about purpose, thought a lot about it, and it like you said, it's so kind of like big and like mysterious. It's like, okay, yes, I want to have a purposeful life, but it's like, how do I actually do it? What's the formula for it? So before we jump into the formula and kind of like the nuance of like the different types of purpose, I want to understand a little bit more like, how does someone know if they have purpose anxiety, or how do we move from like fear of purpose to like freedom in purpose?
Well, first and foremost, I want to pat you on the shoulder and give you the 10-point bonus because you didn't say how we find our purpose. You said we create our purpose. So, first and foremost, I think a big part of the anxiety having to do with purpose is this idea that I have to find this thing, right? And it's this big, audacious purpose thing that's going to define my whole life. And I have to find it, but I don't know where to look and I don't know how to find it. And so that's going to leave me anxious. I like this idea that it's more something we build or create, because then what we're doing is we're giving ourselves a little bit more agency, right? And so I think that's the first thing to realize is we don't find purpose, we create it. And that should decrease our anxiety a little bit because it doesn't mean that we're just waiting for the world to come to us. We can actually do something active. The other part that really decreases the anxiety is we tend to focus on the traditional version of purpose. And usually that's a kind of this really big, impressive thing, right? If you pay attention to social media or if you pay attention to advertisements, or even if you listen to your parents, a lot of times they're going to give you a version of purpose. They're going to give you their version of what they think purpose for you should be. And if it's social media, it's going to be like six-pack abs and traveling the world and having a seven-figure business. And if it's advertisements, it's going to be buying their product because that's going to make your life very purposeful. And if it's your parents, it's going to be getting the good job and being the doctor, the lawyer. Everyone's trying to give you these kind of big, audacious versions of purpose. And usually those things are hard. And so purpose feels really scarce. So the other part about decreasing the anxiety is realizing that purpose isn't scarce. It's actually abundant. Like there are a million things you could do that are purposeful. And so what this framework that I present in the purpose code really does is the first way it deals with the anxiety is to say, look, no, this is totally under your control. You can build this thing. And it's totally out there and easy. It's not as complicated and scarce as you think. And so those are the two big messages. And we can get into why when we talk about the different types of purpose. But those are the two biggest messages I try to get to people to help them with the anxiety.
Yeah. There's almost like a keeping up with the Joneses purpose problem. Like, I see these people on social media who have this like, or, you know, anywhere that have this big purpose, like I'm going to get to Mars, or like I'm going to solve cancer, or I'm going to, you know, help 1 million people do X, Y, and Z.
I mean,
And we feel like we have to have that as well. Something that big.
I think there's a purpose vacuum out there. Like especially young people today. So I think there's more of a purpose vacuum today than ever. And there are a few reasons for this. First of all, the things people used to find purposeful, we don't anymore. So we go back 20, 30, 40 years ago, people found purpose in religion. Like we were a very highly religious society. So you didn't question some of your purpose. You didn't question, you had these communities, you showed up, you hung out with them every Saturday or Sunday, depending on what religion you are, or Friday. Like that was the thing about it. We also were very attached to our jobs, right? There was no quiet quitting, 20 or 30 years ago. So work was very purposeful. The other thing about it too was, there was a scarcity. We weren't as wealthy. So just making enough money to survive, it was the only purpose we had time for because money was much more scarce back in the day than it is today. And so we had all these versions of purpose for better, for worse, that we don't have today. So there's this purpose vacuum. And so what fills the purpose vacuum? I'm anxious. I've been trying to figure out what purpose looks like in my life. I can't figure it out. I don't have any of these older structures that used to be purposeful, that used to connect me to other people. And so where am I going to turn? Most people nowadays turn to what's right in front of them, their phone, social media. And social media, as you and I know, are full of people trying to sell something to us. A lot of times these influencers, they might be really good people, but they want you to follow them and they want you to click on the link and they want to get the affiliate marketing revenue. and they want you to buy whatever they're advertising. Same with advertisers. And so we're really being sold this version of purpose that doesn't serve us. It's someone else's version of purpose. And we figure if we can just co opt it, right? If I can just get the six pack abs or travel the world or run the 7-figure business, all of a sudden I'll feel good inside. And most of us just can't succeed at all those things because not everyone can have six pack abs. Most people fail when they try to run 7-figure businesses. Most people don't live their life traveling the world every month. And so you got to be the right person at the right time, doing the right things with a heck of a lot of luck. And most of us don't have all those ingredients. And so that just leaves us all feeling bad. So we have this vacuum, and what we're filling the vacuum with is something that isn't assuring us or making us feel good. It's making us feel anxious. And that's kind of where we get stuck.
Yeah. And obviously the other challenge with social media is it's like everyone's highlight reel. So
Yeah.
like everyone's there saying like, oh, like I'm living my purpose and like this is what I'm doing. I'm traveling the world. I'm building this business. I'm getting in shape, but they don't share the behind the scenes of like when they're in the lull or when they feel aimless or purposeless. And it's so challenging because like we're in that vacuum and that it seems like everyone has this purpose but us, because there's not a ton of people online being like, I don't feel like I have purpose or I'm struggling to find this. And so even though like, as you said, 91% of people like experience this perfect purpose anxiety, we don't see that in our environment.
No, and we're not realistic. Like when we look at our favorite influencers, a lot of times what they do day in, day out is not glorious. It's not fun, and it's a lot of hard work. And most of us don't actually want to do all that hard work. Like, so we see what they're showing on social media, and like that would be really cool. But I know a lot of mid-range influencers, and they live really hard lives. And mostly they're much less glamorous than what actually gets posted. Do you really want to spend your life 95% of your time doing things that are exhausting that you may or may not like for the 5%, the 5-minute Instagram reel that you're posting? I'd rather be happy 95% of my life, not just the 5% where I'm showing off this wonderful thing. Like, we want to get involved in doing things that feel purposeful, that we enjoy the process of doing them.
Yeah.
If the end goal is everything for us, you're going to spend a lot of time doing stuff you don't like in pursuit of a goal that you might or might not reach.
Yeah. And I think, social media is like any tool. There's, it's a double-edged sword. So like people who enjoy the process of creating content, that can be very purposeful activity for them. But then there's a lot of people, who they're just consuming it, or they don't actually enjoy the process of creating that much content. And so like you said, a lot of kind of, influencers or creators, and it's like you and I both know them. It's like a content creation hamster wheel. Like they can't stop because it fuels their business. And it's like, I think that's one of the reasons I'm still so passionate about financial independence, is because like even if you do want to create content, you don't have to rely on the endless content hamster wheel in order to like be okay financially. And I think that's why like financial independence, no matter whether you do work that you enjoy or, not, like it's a worthwhile goal because it allows you to kind of like when something becomes no longer enjoyable, you can step away, even if you're not at financial independence, because you have that financial room to be like, hey, I want to pivot into something that feels more purposeful for this season of my life.
Yeah, I mean, we lose the 1,000-foot perspective. We want to use money and our individual sense of purpose to live a life that we mostly love and rarely loathe. What we don't want to do is live a life we loathe in order to accrue lots of money. Like if you're doing that, then you've got the game backwards. Money is supposed to give you power and freedom and joy and love and a wondrous, perfect, awesome life, not the other way around, that we want to kind of, live a life we don't enjoy at all just to make lots and lots of money. It makes no sense.
Yeah. In the book, you at the conclusion of every chapter, you have this great kind of like exercises that people can do. And, you know, in one of the earlier chapters, there is like doing a social media audit. So, like untangling your desires from other people's curated lives. And I can tell you, like, depending on whose content I'm consuming, like their goals become my goals, like, and
Totally.
like I have to
Totally.
consciously be like, is that really my current goal? And then what I've realized for myself is whatever my goal is, find the creators who are creating content around that, you know, goal or thing that I'm after, and use that as kind of fuel to continue to go after my true authentic goal. But if I'm not careful about really curating my own consumption of social media, then suddenly I find myself being like, oh, I need to build a 7-figure business.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah, and it's a good sign. It's like just ask yourself a question. How do I feel after I consumed that content? When I consume content surrounding something that brings me joy that I like I've said in this book and I talk about all the time, one of my childhood joys was baseball cards. And so when I look at a YouTube video or a Facebook video and it's someone opening up a fresh pack of baseball cards from the 1980s and I watch it, at the end of that 2 minutes of them going through all the cards, I feel joy and excitement and happy. If that's how you feel, then this is probably a good use of your social media time. But if you are watching social media and coming out feeling anxious or like pushed to do something that because you feel inadequate, and so you're like, oh, that made me feel bad. Now I need to go and kick butt and recreate the same thing, etc. If you're feeling bad after consuming it, then it's probably not good for you.
yeah. Yeah, and I think that's a really good encouragement to any of the listeners, is to really like pay attention to how you feel
Mm.
after you consume something, especially social media. And I always tell this to my coaching clients. Same thing with food, like anything you consume, whether it's information, food, social media. Like, how do you actually feel afterwards, and creating that relationship with yourself where you actually like aware of how you feel after you consume different types of things, and that is a way for you to move into more authenticity. And I believe leads us kind of into the next section that I want to cover with you, which is like, explain to me the difference between big P purpose and what you call little p purpose.
So, what I really found when I started trying to figure out this purpose paradox, right? Why can purpose feel like two different things? Is most of us go after what I think is a more noxious version of purpose, the anxiety provoking kind, is which is what I call big P purpose. So, what is big P purpose? It's usually big and audacious. And again, in America, we kind of oversize things, right? So we supersize it. We say, well, if I can think it, I can build it. And so these are those big, audacious goals. I want to be president. I want to be a billionaire, right? I want to cure cancer, all these really big, audacious goals. Big B purpose tends to be very goal focused. It's usually all or nothing. Like I either run to be president and win the election or I don't, right? It's very scarcity mindset oriented. And usually because it's big and audacious, you need a lot of luck. So you have to be the right person at the right time, doing the right things with the right skills, maybe the right genetics, and then also happen to have a lot of luck. So you don't have as much agency or control over it. And so it's really easy to fail. And so I think big P purpose leaves us feeling anxious. The other side is little P purpose, which isn't goal oriented, it's process oriented. So this is doing things that light us up. And what I love about little P purpose is it's almost impossible to fail. And so it's really abundant. Like, what are the million things I could be doing that would be exciting and light me up? So instead of being all or nothing, I always say it's all or all. And if you start doing something and you don't enjoy doing it, guess what? You just stop and start doing something else. And so what I found is instead of going after that big P purpose, which leaves us trying to keep up with the Joneses and feeling anxious, a lot of people find a lot more peace and a lot more contentedness with little P purpose. And I think ultimately a lot more happiness.
Yeah. Yeah. So explain to me either, you know, some of your little p purpose or some of the examples in the book I think there's tons of great examples as well as counter examples, but like let's like illuminate the idea with like some actual concrete examples of what little p purpose looks like in someone's life.
First and foremost, there are very few rules when it comes to little p purpose. As long as it's process oriented, um, basically it can be big or small. You can have one, you can have many. It can be something that eventually changes the world, but it certainly doesn't have to. And so, what are some of my little p purposes? Things as banal as I love to read, like mystery novels and things like that. I love to take long walks. Those are very much little p purpose for me. I love the process of doing them. They're not goal oriented, other than I enjoy doing them. But then there's some things that are a little deeper. I like podcasting. In fact, I love podcasting. And when I get on the mic and I'm interviewing someone, that is some of the best time I spend all day. And even if that podcast, if I accidentally erase it and it goes nowhere, it was still a good use of my hour. Now, I want to be clear here. Podcasting is my little p purpose. I could turn it into big p purpose. I could say, well, my goal really is to get 1 million downloads a month. And in order to get those 1 million downloads, I could start doing things I don't love doing. Like, I'm not a big fan of posting on Instagram and Facebook and doing reels. Like, I find that tiring and exhausting. But if I really wanted to get to 1 million downloads a month, I might start spending my time doing all that kind of thing to really push up my downloads. So what I've done is I've taken something that was little p purpose, something I love the process of doing, and I turned it into big P or goal-oriented purpose, which I spend a lot of time doing things I don't like doing. And so little p purpose is abundant. I love writing books. I have so many versions of little p purpose. I actually don't have time to pursue them all. Like, if I had more time, I do have this love of baseball cards from being a kid, and I don't have time. I've got other things I want to do. I love blogging. There's a million things out there. And so the key is that little p purpose is everything, and it's everywhere. And I will tell you, I still get that question like, well, okay, but you said that people were anxious and stressed because they didn't know how to find their purpose. And you're saying, well, you don't need to find it. You just build it. But then they say, well, how do I know where to begin? And what I always tell people is, it is true. You have to build your purpose. You have to create it. But usually there's these inklings, these beckonings, these things that could light us up. And that's where we want to build purpose around. I call those purpose anchors. And so the bigger, better question is not how do I find my purpose? It's how do I encounter these purpose anchors to then build a life of purpose around?
Yeah. And I think that's such a critical understanding is for those listening or watching is identifying potential purpose anchors in your life and then starting to invest in more activity around those purpose anchors. So you have several recommendations in the book of how to potentially identify some of those little p purpose avenues and purpose anchors. Can you share those with us?
So it's actually a lot more simple than people think. So there are 3 or 4 ways I talk about in the book, and let me just run through a few of them really quickly here. So I'm a hospice doctor, and so I talk to people at the end of their lives, and so we talk about regret. And so I think regret is a wonderful place to start thinking about purpose anchors. The problem with dying patients is they don't have agency, right? They can tell you everything they regret, but they probably don't have the energy or time to start doing purposeful activities to fix that. But here's the wonderful thing. Most people who are listening to this are not on their deathbed. And so if they could get into that mindset and ask themselves that question, if I found out I was dying in a month, what would I really regret never having the energy, courage, or time to do? Well, let's take those regrets and turn them around into purpose anchors. Those are wonderful things to start building a life of purpose around. I know, because I did this exercise a bunch of years ago. And one of the things that came up is I said, I would really regret if I never traditionally published a book. But guess what? I wasn't dying. So I could then start building some purpose around that, which is exactly what I did. So regrets are a great way to start thinking about purpose anchors. I call it a regret audit, right? Do an audit of what you'd regret if you got some really bad news. That's the first way. The second way is the joys of childhood. Remember, I kept on talking about baseball cards a little while ago? I loved baseball cards when I was a little. Most people found things they loved when they were little because when we're kids, we tend to pursue purpose without any anxiety or worry. Like, right, you have a day off of school, You would jump on your bike, you'd build a fort, you'd play basketball all day, you'd forget that it was dinner time, you'd come home late. That is purpose in abundance. That's little p purpose. So if you can think back to your childhood room, what were the posters? What were the trophies? What were the things that cluttered your room? Maybe those could be purpose anchors today. Another way to think about purpose anchors is what I call the art of subtraction. You and I talked about this in my last book. If you look at your job and list out all the 10 or 15 roles and responsibilities and just start taking a pencil and just striking out everything you don't like, are there a few things that remain? When I looked at my job as being a doctor, I was exhausted. Everything tired me out. I was burnt out. When I did this process and got rid of almost everything I did, there was one thing left over, but that one thing is something I do even if I wasn't being paid for it. It was hospice work. So I knew for me that was a purpose anchor. And last but not least, if none of that works, you can do what I call the spaghetti method, which is take a bunch of spaghetti, throw it against the wall, see what sticks. That means saying yes to people you normally don't say yes to, doing things you don't normally do, maybe even doing activities that scare you a little bit, spending a day doing them, and then see what happens. Did you like it? Did you not like it? Was it a good use of your day? If it was, maybe that could be a purpose anchor. So those are 4 really quick ways to think about this. And what I always tell people is this is low stress. There are no consequences. This is trial and error. Don't worry about it. Just try doing something that you may or may not like and see what happens. And there's nothing to lose. If you don't find it pleasing or appealing, do something else.
Yeah, I'll add one other strategy that the listener could potentially use that I've found very valuable for myself and for coaching clients that I've worked with is there's this thing called the Sparketype, which is a personality quiz really designed to help you identify the type of work that makes you come alive. And the type of work is like the process oriented work. And so I'll use myself as an example. I am a performer as my primary Sparketype. So like I turn moments into magic. So I love pitching. I love podcasting. I love speaking to a group of people. And my secondary Sparketype, which, or like what Jonathan Fields, the creator of this, calls your shadow Sparketype, which fuels your primary Sparketype, is the maven, which is the learner. So for me, anytime I can learn something and then go and perform it to teach it to someone else, it's a really enjoyable process for me. So similar to you, Jordan, I love the process of podcasting because I get to like dive deep into this person's work and like learn a bunch of it. Then I get to go like ask them more questions and then like create a co-created performance with them about everything that I just learned and learn even more in the process. And it's really, really enjoyable for me. And then the other cool thing about the Sparketype is it helps you identify your anti-Sparketype or the type of work that takes the most energy from you. So for me, that's the nurturer. And so that it doesn't mean I can't do it. It just means it takes a lot of energy from me. So the way I think about the context of your book is like the art of subtraction. Like, how do we remove more of the anti-Sparketype work in our life, whether that's in our personal life, our professional life, etc. So again, to put it into context for myself, I was in enterprise B2B sales for a very long time. So I loved the whole pitching, deal negotiation, closing, but the ongoing customer service, the nurturing, that was so exhausting for me, but I did a really good job about making sure I stayed out of that. And so go ahead.
I was just going to say one thing I want to add, but also warn, which I don't think is a problem with the Sparketype, but just be aware of certain other inventories because you're not looking for what you're good at. You're looking for what lights you up. And sometimes those are not the same thing. And so I just want to warn people, some of these inventories start really to parse out or classify what you are good at. I was a fantastic physician. I'm not nearly as good of a podcaster or a writer as I was as a physician, but being a physician was not lighting me up. I'd rather you focus on what lights you up, whether you're good at it or not. But I think the Sparketype, what you're talking about, is much more about what lights you up.
Yeah, 100%. And it's so interesting you brought that up because uh Cal Newport wrote a book called So Good They Can't Ignore You, which is about like focusing on doubling down at like what you're really good at and not pursuing passion. And then kind of if I remember correctly, the framework is like eventually you get so good that you become passionate about it and people want to pay you a lot for it. But I think that can be like troublesome for some people because what if what you're really good at you don't enjoy?
And so I'm a good example of exactly that. I was a fantastic physician. The thing I am best at in this world is being a physician, and that was not filling me up.
Yeah.
In fact, I went the exact opposite. I went from loving it to not liking it over time, even as I got better and better and got paid more and more and more for it.
Which makes it even harder to step away
and
from.
I would say sometimes public speaking is the same way. I'm a pretty darn good public speaker, and the better I get at it and the more I get paid for it, but it can be exhausting too. So if you do too much of it, doubling down on it in that case would probably burn me out in that one also. So that's me personally. And I get where Cal Newport is coming from. But I think life is too short to spend a lot of time doing things you don't like. So I guess you can double down on something you're good at, assuming you'll eventually like it. But I've met enough professionals who are really good at their jobs but don't love them, who make lots of money. So I don't know if I 100% agree with that assertion.
Yeah. And I'll be honest, I haven't read the book in several years, probably 8 plus. And so like, I don't want, I may be, misspeaking about some of it. But I think, as you said, Sparketype is really meant to identify the type of work that makes you come alive. So I think that is a good strategy. It's free. But I think if you read Jordan's book first, it's going to help you understand how to leverage that even more. So we've been talking a ton about purpose, and inherently within purpose or alongside it is meaning. And in the book, you make a distinction between meaning and purpose. And I really want you to share that with us.
So I always say that happiness is made up of two things, meaning and purpose. And a lot of people think that they're the same thing, but I actually think of them as very distinctly different things. So meaning is our cognitive way we think about our past. It's the stories we tell ourselves about ourselves, and it's basically a journey to feeling enough. Okay? So people who are happy tend to tell themselves a heroic story. They'll look back at their past. They'll say, I had these traumas, I had these difficulties, but I got through them and I was enough. And that's why I am where I am today. And I'll probably continue to be enough in the present and future. Unhappy people tend to tell themselves a victim story. Like, I had these traumas and these problems in the past. I was thwarted. I was never enough. And that's why I am where I am today. And I'll probably continue to be thwarted in the future. That's meaning. And whether you feel enough or not, whether you make that journey to enough, will kind of tell us whether you're on your way to happiness or not. But the second part of that coin is then purpose. Purpose is not about thoughts and it's not about the past. Purpose is about our present and future, and it's all about action. So purpose is about doing the things that light us up. And so if we have a good sense of meaning and feel enough, we can then joyfully jump into purpose, and we don't have to prove our enoughness because our sense of meaning already does that. And we can just find our little p purpose and pursue it, and it can fill us up. And that's where I think the happiness lies, is getting meaning and purpose right. And something I think we'll talk more about is when you tend to get meaning right, you joyfully jump into purpose, and that purpose tends to connect you to other people. And that's kind of the road I think that leads us eventually to that kind of happiness and the connectedness.
Yeah, so I want to double click on that. Off air, I kind of mentioned to you, I think naturally I've been really good about telling empowering stories about my own story. But one of the things I think about is like, what about the people like that are telling a negative story about their journey? Like, how can they reframe or learn to tell a better story that gives them that ability to create a powerful or empowering meaning to their journey that then gives them the energy to go pursue that little p purpose or multiple little p purposes?
So there's something called narrative therapy, which you can do on your own. You can Google it and use ChatGPT to teach you how to do narrative therapy, et cetera. But what narrative therapy is it's a process of going back and looking at those major stories of your life, especially the stressful and traumatic stories, and separating you from the bad things that happen. So I'll give you a perfect example. My father died when I was 7 and he was 40 and he was a doctor. And I somehow convinced myself that I was somehow responsible because I was 7 and 7-year-old kids think they're responsible for everything that happens. And so I figured I could fix everything cosmically by becoming a doctor like him, walking in his footsteps, and I was going to save the world, right? And so that was my sense of meaning. But what happened is I eventually became a doctor and I was thwarted, right? Because it didn't bring my dad back. And I couldn't save the world. Like there were people you just can't help. And so what I had to do is I had to tell myself a better, different story. Right. And so the better, different story was I had to go back and separate myself from the trauma. Say, well, yes, my dad did die, but I wasn't responsible. I was a little kid. I was a good kid in a bad situation. And when I separated myself from the trauma and I was able to see them as distinct, I could then kind of realize, oh, like I went through this really hard thing and I didn't give up and I didn't, drop out or fail or whatever. I doubled down, worked harder, and then became this wonderful thing, a doctor. Maybe something that didn't fill me in the end, but look at the heroism of getting through that. And then I also got married and had kids and I did all these wonderful things. And I was a really well-functioning adult. And so what I did is I took that kind of trauma and that story that felt where I was thwarted, that victim story, and turned it much more into a heroic story where I had agency. And so there are therapists who will do this with you, right? There's therapists can take you through this process, but that's what narrative therapy is. It's separating you from the trauma, reimagining, revisioning, and rewriting that story and seeing yourself more in that heroic role as opposed to the victim role. And so that's what you have to do. And it is so important. And let me tell you why it's so important. If you don't get the meaning part right, purpose becomes difficult. And we have tons and tons of examples of this in pop culture. So Steve Jobs, perfect example. Steve Jobs, and we know this from all of his biographies and everything, Steve Jobs was adopted and he struggled with this idea of being enough because his parents gave him up. I don't think he ever went back and dealt with that. Instead, he tried to purpose his way to enough. So he didn't have a good sense of meaning. He didn't feel enough. So he's like, if I just achieve all these things, I'm going to finally feel enough. So he became very, very wealthy. He created some of the coolest tech out there. But he also, for instance, had a daughter that he never acknowledged. And he was surrounded by people who really were annoyed by him a lot of the time. He got kicked out of his business, right? And had to eventually fight his way back. Like, this doesn't sound like a particularly happy person, partially because his sense of meaning was off, because he didn't have that sense of enoughness. And so he kept on trying to prove he was enough through purpose. And I always say you can't purpose your way to enough. That just gets you on this achievement treadmill where you keep on trying to achieve things and you achieve something and you're like, finally, I've made my first million. I'm going to finally feel enough. And then a few hours later, you're like, oh, I don't feel any better. And so you double down and say, I have to make 2 million. And, it creates this never ending path of trying to achieve your way to enough, and it doesn't work. And so they're both critically important. You have to get meaning right so you feel enough, but that also relieves you of the stress of trying to prove yourself with purpose. And therefore, purpose can be light and joyful. It can be just doing the things that light you up and doubling down on the process. And that's where I think we are free to be our best selves, to be our most intentional. And like I said, when you're lit up, not only are you happier and enjoying the process, but you attract other people because like a moth to the flame, they see you lit up. And if they know something about what you're doing, they want to mentor you. And if they are struggling like you, they want to combine together to get a better outcome. And if they don't know as much as you, they want to learn from you. And this is where we get these communities of people interested in the same things. And that's where I think we really start feeling happy, when we're connected to people who have the same passions and interests and we work together to change the world.
Yeah. And I think this kind of segues nicely into the next chunk that I want to dive into, which is the climb. So we, funny enough, spoke about this on our last conversation on my show, but I think you have even more kind of frameworks for it, or general rules of thumb that make it a powerful process. So first, explain to us like what the climb is, and then walk us through like how do we actually have a successful climb.
So the climb is purpose in action. And this is actually where the work comes in. So remember, I kind of say, purpose is fairly straightforward. Sometimes I even say it's easy. Well, it's not exactly easy, right? Defining these purpose anchors and trying to figure out what lights us up is pretty straightforward. But then you have to take action. That's the hard part, right? Which is you have to build activities around that thing that is exciting and important to you. And so that's what the climb is. The climb is purpose and action. It's creating activities around these purpose anchors that are a good use of your time. So again, I like podcasting. Podcasting is a purpose anchor for me. So what did I do? I created a podcast. I interview people. I go to conferences with other podcasters where we learn how to up our game. I spend time listening to interviewers who are at the top of their game so that I can learn how to be a better interviewer. These are all podcast related climbs. Podcasting is my purpose anchor. And so these are all activities I can joyfully jump into that excite me, and I enjoy the process of doing them. So they're a good use of my time. And there's some rules to what makes a good or bad climb, and it's very similar to the differences between big P and little p purpose. Like a good climb is one that's really not failable, right? It's something you can get excited about that just by doing it, you're fulfilling that climb. It has to be something more process oriented and less goal oriented, right? If your climb is too goal oriented, then it all starts focusing on whether I get there or not. Another important part to your climb is it can be incremental. And in fact, it embraces incremental change and incremental gain. So while I don't like these big audacious goals, like I can look at my podcast and say, I would like to have some more followers. And so what can I do for that? Well, I can become a better interviewer, right? So part of my climb could be I love listening to Fresh Air, NPR's podcast, Terry Gross. She is a fantastic interviewer. So part of my climb when it comes to my podcast to become a better interviewer is that I listen to Terry Gross on a regular basis and listen how she interviews people so I can up my interview game. That is incremental gain. It's not per se goal oriented. I'm not trying to do that to get a million more downloads. I'm just doing it because I want to slowly improve, and I enjoy the process of listening to her do her podcast. And so there's some kind of vague rules around these climbs, but the point is that it's supposed to nurture you. And so what's wonderful about this is you can take any purpose anchor and think about millions of climbs associated with it, right? So if my purpose anchor is book writing, well, I can write a book, but I could also, become part of a book club. I could do a writing the book podcast. I could write a writing the book blog. I mean, I can think of so many different things. I can hire a book writing coach. These are all climbs having to do with that purpose anchor, and they are just really abundant.
Yeah. So a couple thoughts. One is I love the concept of the climb because it is so focused on the process of it. And I think about the areas of life where like I've achieved some modicum of success, both like in fitness and with, wealth building. And I honestly attribute a lot of that success to falling in love with the climb, the actual
Yeah.
process of it. And it's okay to have goals, but the goals, as you mentioned, it's like you get to $1 million and you're like, okay, nothing's really different. Let's make it 2 million. You get to 2 million, like, okay, let's make it 4 million. And I think if you can learn to fall in love with the process, it doesn't matter how long the climb takes to get to the peak, or the fact that you may change the peak or move the peak. And I think it also makes it more sustainable, is like when you fall in love with the actual, like, hey, I just like hiking a climb. Like,
Yep.
it doesn't matter if I get to the peak or not. I mean, I'm going to try to get there, but if I don't, like, I still enjoy trying to get there. Or if it takes me 2 years longer than I thought it was, I enjoyed the actual hiking of the mountain versus like I'm only happy when I get to the peak of the mountain.
You become the person you want to be when you do the thing, not when you reach the goal. What do I mean by this? You become a healthy person who likes to push themselves when you run, not when you finish the marathon. You become a writer when you write, not when you publish a book. It's not the goal that defines you, it's the intention and the actions. And that's what I think we need to concentrate on. If you want to be a particular type of person, you got to do the thing. That's it. You can't buy the thing. It's not about buying the running shoes. You can't achieve the goal, which is about finishing the marathon. It's getting out there day in, day out and running and hopefully enjoying the process. And
Yeah.
that's how I think we have to become the people we want to be. A lot of these people who don't have a great sense of meaning feel like they can purpose their way into being who they want to be, and it just doesn't work. They think that if I just reach this achievement, I'll be the person I want to be. And we all know it doesn't work that way. You become the person you want to be by doing the thing.
100%. And, that's one of the biggest rewards, is becoming that person who
Yeah.
creates podcasts, that person who is fit because they, love the process of exercising. And I think the other big part of that is, it just makes life so much better because you're focused on that incremental gain, which is like there's always micro wins along the entire climb. It's like, cool, I am 100 yards farther than I was last week or whatever, a mile farther. And like, I think that is so crucial because goals focus on like the gap between where you are and where you want to be, but the climb is focused on the fact that I've gone from here to here, so I'm infinitely farther than I was 1 year ago.
There is this belief when people hear my framework that the climb is supposed to be easy or that little p purpose is supposed to be easy. And actually, I love hard.
Yeah.
Like, I like my little p purpose to be hard. And in fact, I think most of us are happiest when we are in the arena, fighting the valiant fight, getting the snot kicked out of us, barely able to lift our head. That's where I think life is learned. This isn't about easy or hard. It's about doing things that are deeply important to you. And sometimes that means doing them at a difficult level and suffering and even failing. I always tell people, like, some of my happiest times in life were when I was in medical school because I was doing this really hard thing that was deeply important to me at the time. And at times I was getting my butt kicked, right? It was hard, really hard. But that was actually more joyful than actually becoming a doctor in the end. And so you pick these climbs, sometimes even pick ones that challenge you, that are hard, fail, go out there, do hard things, but enjoy being in the arena and fighting the valiant fight. And I think that's where growth happens. And that's that incremental gain. And that's that sense of growing as a person. I'm not saying don't grow as a person. I'm not saying just sit there and do things that are all easy, that are all, that don't challenge you. It's not about that. It's about doing the hard things, but doing things you enjoy and giving it your all.
Yeah. Talk to me a little bit more about the idea of like stacking multiple little P's. Because I think one thing, like, I'm thinking about the people that are still like, oh, my purpose isn't as big as your purpose. They'll like, oh, it's not as big as this person's, right? And so, like, how do we reframe our own interpretation of our life of purpose, if that's like a bunch of little P's or one P? Like, talk to me a little bit more about that.
Here's the thing about it. There really are no rules. So you might be a person who just has this one overwhelming thing that fills you up, that you enjoy, and you dedicate your life to it, and there's not a lot of room for everything else. You know what? That's totally fine if you enjoy the process and if it lights you up. But most of us have a mix of ones that take up a lot of time and are really deep and enduring, like for me, something like writing a book. But then we have a bunch of other stuff that isn't as deep as enduring and is not as time consuming, but still lights us up, like taking a walk, going on a hike, reading a good book. And so here's the interesting thing. There's some people who know right away what their version of purpose is that really is this big, more enduring, dedicate my life to type of thing. And I think if you have that, great. But that's not most people. So I do a lot of coaching around purpose, and I take them through that process of finding their purpose anchors, right? We do a little bit of a regret audit or a life review. We talk about the joys of childhood. We talk about work. We talk about all this. And I create a grid for them. And usually I can find at least 15 or 20 purpose anchors with these people without even trying. And then we do another grid where we take each purpose anchor, like we take 4 or 5 of them, and find another 4 or 5 different activities or climbs they could build around each purpose anchor. And I've never yet had a coaching client that couldn't fill out these grids within a half an hour or 45 minutes. So when you really do the work, you will find that little P purpose is everywhere. And once you start finding it in your life, it's hard not to see it. Most people struggle with having too much. And they're like, oh my God, I have this list of 15 things I now have to do. And I have to say, don't worry about it. Do 2 or 3. And then if you get a little extra time, add in another one. Or if you stop liking one thing, drop that and add in something else. You most likely, if you go through this process, will have too much, not too little. And that's the goal.
Yeah, I think that's so powerful too, because the fact that you can like, you're totally right. Like, if you just take a little bit of time to use some of the tools that you said, like, spaghetti method, like try a bunch of different things you mentioned in your book, what you enjoyed as a kid, what are some of the like aspects of your current job that you enjoy, and then how do you create like experiments or like trial runs of like doing more activity around that, or doing it in a different way that brings more of the climb or the process oriented aspect of it into your life. And I think it's just having the courage to go do that versus staying comfortable doing what you've always done.
If you want something different, you're going to have to do something different, right? This is you and I, it's the coaching mantra. If you want a different outcome, you can't keep doing the same things. You're going to have to do something different. And when you do something different, you're stepping out of your zone of comfort into an uncomfortable place. And so you're right. It is all about courage. Like, I hear people tell me all day, they always give me 2 excuses. I don't have enough time and I don't have enough money. And when you bring up the fact that the Bureau of Labor Statistics does the American Time Survey, and your average person has between 4.5 and 5 hours of free time a day, leisure time, and that people in lower socioeconomic classes tend to have a little bit more, it kind of blows out of this water that at least your average person doesn't have enough time. And then when they start talking about money, and you look at all the research that shows that actually what's most closely associated with happiness are things like interpersonal connections and not money, it kind of blows the idea that money is what's holding you back. What's holding most people back is courage.
Yeah.
It's courage to do this, what feels like incredibly hard thing, which is to look into your life and say, what am I not doing that lights me up? And then have the courage to start building activities around that. And so it really is. It's all about courage.
Yeah. So one of the related to this, like, ideas, like, what is my mission? What is my purpose? And one of the best things I learned from one of my teachers, one of my coaches, was like, if you don't know what your purpose, your mission is, you're your purpose, your mission is to find your mission or your purpose. And then it makes it, instead of being like, oh, I don't know what my purpose is, it turns it into like this idea of you're exploring things until you find it. And that's what you're suggesting is like, come up with 15 different things that you could try that are going to lead you down this exploratory path that will allow you to identify little p purposes that really light you up, that where you enjoy the process of it, you enjoy the incremental climb of whatever that activity is. And like, the thing is, those can change throughout your life. Like I've gone through periods where, in the last podcast, I ran a, financial independence meetup for 5 years in a row. And then I kind of got bored of it. But then I translated it into like a coaching program where I was teaching people who needed like more accountability and support with that. And I've gone through periods where I was like really into spike ball. And then I got bored of spike ball. And now I'm getting more into pickleball. And I think it's like embracing this like never ending journey of like changing seasons of little p purpose in your life.
And, I really tell people, stop worrying so much about mission. And I would add in the terms impact and legacy, because I think when we're talking about our mission, we're really talking about what are we going to do that's going to change the world, have the biggest impact, legacy, et cetera. And a lot of times I tell people, you're looking at it wrong. If you do things that light you up, your mission or your impact and legacy will flow from that, as opposed to starting with what I think my mission or impact and legacy should be and then identifying how to get there. And so I'm a perfect example of that, right? My big audacious purpose, my big P purpose, was to become a doctor because I wanted to change the world and undo my dad's death. So I started with mission, and then I built activities around it. And that burnt me out, and it didn't work. And so what happened? I was lucky enough to be financially independent enough to leave being a doctor, and I flipped it around. So I let go of mission, I let go of impact and legacy, and I just said, okay, what do I love doing? What lights me up? And so I started writing and podcasting and blogging and then writing books. Well, here's the thing. As a doctor, doing something that was big P purpose for me that burnt me out, I probably helped 1,000 people a year. Maybe if I was lucky, like you don't help everyone, but I'll be generous and say I hopefully helped 1,000 people a year. And then my career cut short though, because I burnt out and didn't want to do it anymore. When I started doing things that just lit me up, like podcasting and writing books, my podcast has gone out to millions of people. My book has gone out to thousands and thousands of people. My impact and legacy, my mission has grown exponentially. But guess what? It was a happy side effect. I didn't plan on that. I just did things that I love that lit me up. And in the process, I became a more intentional person who became a better version of me. And because it lit me up, that attracted other people. And whether I meant to or not, I started changing the world more.
Yeah. And a really important point I want to point out for the audience is Jordan did this over numerous years. Like you started, okay, I want to write more. You started with a medical blog. You discovered the financial independence community and concept, and you started writing about personal finance and financial independence. Then this led you into podcasting, and like this unfolded over multiple years, but it was because you were pursuing those little p purposes that like you were like, you asked yourself, like, what would I regret not doing? Writing a book, like speaking, public speaking, podcasting, etc. And then you started moving up those mountains incrementally. And now you're affecting infinitely more people in a way that is infinitely more enjoyable for you.
And here's the magic. People all the time say, well, that was you and you're lucky, and not everyone's going to start a podcast that's going to be downloaded by millions of people. Not everyone's going to be able to public speak, et cetera. But I kind of look at them and say, but that's the parlance of big P purpose. It doesn't matter. I won from the beginning. I won before I even played the game because I was filling my time with things that lit me up. And if it happened as a happy side effect to affect lots of people, awesome. And if it didn't, I I think it was still a good use of my time. It still connected me to other people. It still increased my happiness. It still lit me up. But I think when you do those things, the likelihood you are going to affect more people and even reach maybe some of the more traditional versions of what you think of success, I just think it's more likely. But you win either way. I'm trying to create a situation where everyone wins, Justin. That's
Yeah,
my goal. Create a version of
100%.
purpose in which everybody wins.
100%. And one of the good things, or I think empowering things you mentioned in the book, is like big P is often like win or lose. You either become president or you don't. Whereas like little P purpose can actually have massive impact, but you win no matter what like happens, and everyone else who's comes into contact with you wins as well.
And people make the mistake. They're like, the difference between big P purpose and little P purpose is goals. And I say, not exactly. Like, you can have goals with little P purpose, but you have to be just a little more goal agnostic, not goal phobic, but goal agnostic. So I can decide that I love politics and I love being with the people and I love campaigning and I love positively impacting the world. That's my little P purpose. And so I start running for office and it lights me up. And because it lights me up, people believe in me and I create a platform. I can even decide I want to become president. And that can be a goal of mine. But it's still little P purpose if I enjoy the process and if I'm goal agnostic. Look, I love what I'm doing. And if I happen to move forward and one day get elected president, awesome. And if I happen to keep doing what I'm doing and never make it a step further, but I love what I'm doing, also awesome. So it's not that goals are horrible. In fact, I want you to maybe change the world too. Like, I want you to maybe become president, or I want you to, travel to Mars, or I want you to do all these things, but I don't want your happiness to be dependent on whether you reach that goal or not. I want you to be happy today. I want you to do things you like and enjoy and light you up today. And if that leads to goals, fantastic.
Yeah. One of the things I love most about your book is you're really kind of secretly pushing people towards community and connection. But before we get to that, there's like one last chunk that I want to like really dive into because I found it so fascinating. And it's this idea of generational trauma and generational growth. And you've, in some senses, already spoken about it, but not overtly. So walk me through kind of like the difference between the two and why those are important.
Well, this is where we really start talking about impact and legacy and why little P purpose actually leads to impact legacy, even if big P purpose doesn't, right? So big P purpose, you either hit the goal and have tons of impact and legacy or you don't. Little P purpose is you do things that light you up. And so I like to frame it around generational trauma. So what is generational trauma? Generational trauma are the beliefs, the teachings, the things that we inherit from our parents and our grandparents, et cetera, that don't serve us. So for instance, my grandma was born during the Great Depression. She lived in an orphanage because her mother died of the flu. And so she passed on ideas of money scarcity, which my mom also had. And then my dad died, which they then passed on to me. And so I have generational trauma around money. I have this version of money scarcity. What we don't often talk about is there's the exact opposite of generational trauma is something called generational growth. And I guess the best way to talk about generational growth is to talk about my maternal grandfather. I tell the story all the time. I never met my maternal grandfather. He died in the 1960s. I was born in the 1970s. But he pursued little P purpose and he handed down to me this generational growth and it changed the world. So how did he do this? Well, my maternal grandfather loved math. He just loved it, not because it made him money, not because it was his profession. He just loved math. So he became a CPA, an accountant. And when my mom was little in the 1950s, he would put her on his lap. And at that time, they didn't have computers, right? So he'd have this big grid on paper and he would write in all the numbers in the boxes. And he loved it. And so he would explain to her everything he was doing. And she saw this modeled behavior of someone who loved math. And so she tried on that identity, like all little kids do. They try on the identity of their parents. And my mom decided she loved math too. So my mom eventually became an accountant. And when I was a little kid, I had a learning disability and I couldn't read. When all the rest of my friends were in their beginning readers, I was coloring in a coloring book. And I would have thought I was lost or dumb or not worthy, but there was one thing. See, because my mom loved math, I also loved math. And so while I was at the bottom of the class for reading, I was at the top of the class for math. And that gave me the confidence to believe that eventually I would figure out reading, which I did. And I eventually went into medicine, which is a highly mathematical field, something I'd inherited from my mom and my grandfather. And one day when I was rounding at the hospital, I saw a patient who had been admitted over and over again for dehydration at death's doorstep. And I looked at his labs and I recognized a mathematical connection between two of his labs. And we actually diagnosed him with a rare disease. And it was one of those wonderful diseases where you get them on the right medicine and his symptoms went away. So he stopped coming to the hospital. He stopped being at death's doorstep. In a sense, I kind of saved his life. He was a pastor at a local church who took in runaway kids. And so let's draw the lines. My maternal grandfather, a guy I never met who died in the 1960s, his love of math, like a stone dropped in the ocean, has created a wave, a ripple that over 60 years has joined other waves to become massive and mighty at some times and dissipated to a tiny little wave at other times. But 60 years later, that wave is still coming up on shores hundreds of miles away in the form of a kid who's a runaway, who's found shelter in someone who cares about them. That is generational growth. That is impact. That is legacy. People don't know my maternal grandfather's name. This year, maybe no one will speak his name. And yet his version of purpose lives on. He's left something in the world that has grown exponentially. And so that's the difference between generational trauma and generational growth. That is why Little P Purpose is so powerful, because we're putting something into the world that can change it by positively passing on these characteristics, these joys, these versions of Little P Purpose, which the people around us can model. And it doesn't have to be your kids. It can be your best friend who models that, or the neighborhood kid who models it, or whoever. But that is impact and legacy. That is generational growth. That's why Little P Purpose leads to bigger, better things.
Yeah. I love that. I think it's so cool how when we focus on the work that lights us up, we almost cannot predict the ripple effect that's going to have through the generations of our own family, communities, etc. In the book, you talk about Roman and the baseball cards, and how many different people that affected in your community. And I think it's just one more reason why, like, when you focus on the stuff that lights you up, goal agnostic, not goal phobic, that you can't predict how it's gonna like impact, your children, their children, etc. And that aspect of like, affecting your immediate community, your family, and a larger community is really important. Before we move to community, you talked about your trauma, generational trauma of like the scarcity, and I read in the book, like, it was really hard for you to step away from that, like 9 to 5. And, off air, we talked about how like it's often really hard for people in the financial independence community to, like, even though they have more than enough money, like there's like one more year, like I got to keep working or whatever. So I'm curious, in your own journey, like, how did you heal that generational trauma, to at least to the point where you could like step away, or at least create some healing in that area?
I think of the oldest, richest person I know. So think of someone in pop culture, someone who's old and rich, right? Billions and billions of dollars, right? Warren Buffett. Billions and billions of dollars. Maybe, what is he, 90 something, 92? Warren Buffett would give away all of his money to be me. Why? Because I'm 52 years old.
Yeah.
And so it's true. You can worry about money. You can stick to your job one more year because I don't have enough. You can let generational trauma take over. But ultimately, time is priceless. And so, how do I fight off those demons? One of the ways is just to realize that your precious, most precious commodity, I don't want to call it commodity because you can't really buy or sell it or trade for it, but your most precious asset is your time. And so every moment you spend doing something you don't want to do out of fear or anxiety is probably a moment lost. And so, yes, sometimes fear is going to push us to do things. But if you're continuously doing things because of your fear, for instance, of running out of money, something that I kind of have the generational trauma which suggests to me, I'm going to spend a lot of time doing things I don't like doing, wasting my most important asset. And once it's gone, you can never get it back. In fact, isn't that what money is supposed to do? Is it's supposed to give us freedom and time. And so, but I'm doing the exact opposite, is I'm losing my freedom and time in order to accrue more money. I think it's perspective. I've been around a lot of dying people, and not a single one of them ever says, I wish I made more money. It's not what's on their mind when they die. I think sometimes we have to carry that with us every day. It's called memento mori, this idea that you have to carry with you the fact that you're dying during your normal life and put things in perspective.
Yeah. Speaking of the dying, all the studies show, like, the thing that brings the people the most happiness is deep relationship connections, community. So talk to me a little bit more about, like, how does little p purpose, like, lead us to happiness through community and connection?
So the study that really was a sentinel study when it comes to happiness is the Harvard Adult Developmental Health Study. Started in the early 1900s, took a bunch of Harvard students, gave them questionnaires every 2 years. Eventually they expanded to some of their families. Eventually then they got a bunch of controls from the Boston area. They started with questionnaires, but as technology got better, they started doing blood draws. Eventually they did MRIs, EEGs, all sorts of extensive information. And then they studied them for 80 years. And at the end of 80 years, they asked one basic question: what makes people happy? And it wasn't money, and it wasn't career, and it wasn't achievements, and it wasn't even purpose. And I'll talk about this in a minute. What they actually found makes people most happy is interpersonal connections, communities, people. And so if you remember the beginning of this podcast, I said purpose has been associated with happiness, health, and longevity. Tons of studies, the big H word, happiness. But then I just said that Harvard did the study and didn't find purpose was one of the things. Well, here's the thing. I think little p purpose is a conduit to interpersonal connections. I think when you do things that light you up, you can't but help form a community around you. When I started podcasting and writing and talking about financial independence, people saw me lit up and excited. And so they wanted to come on my podcast, or they wanted to have me on their podcast. And then I created relationships, and then I knew people. And someone like you, who I hadn't talked to in a year or two, I could write you an email and say, hey, I got a new book coming out. Do you want to, you want to connect and talk about it? And you could come back to me and say, hey, that'd be great. And so that's where the interpersonal connections come. So little p purpose is your fastest, easiest way to forming communities. There are different types of communities. I call them identity communities and communities of internal purpose. A lot of people realize, hey, I need community, and they get involved in identity communities. What does that mean? Well, I have kids, and I live in the District 65 school district. So by identity, I am part of the District 65 community. You can define yourself by your religion if you were born into it, but you're not passionate about it. You can define yourself by where you live, by your gender, by all sorts of things. Those are all identity communities. You can join those kind of communities, but you're not going to have nearly as deep interpersonal connections compared to what I call communities of internal purpose. These are communities around something that feels purposeful. So I'm part of the podcasting community. If I got into baseball cards, I could be part of the baseball card community and go to all sorts of different conferences about baseball cards, and I could meet fellow baseball card collectors and store owners, and I could become part of that community. And because I feel passionate and purposeful about that thing, it's going to be a more enduring community. There'll be more interpersonal connections. There's going to be more collaboration and mentoring. And so that's where happiness eventually comes from. So I think the studies about purpose and the Harvard Adult Developmental Health Study are consistent. Little p purpose is a great conduit towards interpersonal connections.
Yeah. And, I mentioned like just the other weekend, I wanted to play spike ball. So I invited a friend to go like play spike ball. And just through pure happenstance, we went to a court that, like, unbeknownst to us, every Saturday and Sunday, like 30 plus people show up and play pickleball. And I'm like, oh my God, like here's a whole community and of people that are interested in this, game of pickleball. And it had people, my age, younger than me, older than me. And I just think it's so important whether you go find those communities that are related to your little p purpose or you build them yourself. Like I said earlier in the show, I wanted to know more people that were interested in financial independence in my area because that was important to me. So I started a meetup group, and I like some of my best friends to this day, 7 years later, are from that group because I followed that little p purpose of like connecting with other people that are interested in the same thing that I was. And that has literally transformed my life.
And it transcends the internal purpose. So remember, I talked about communities of internal purpose, and you make these friends in the financial independence community or the baseball card community or in the podcasting community. But those are also the friends you get a drink with afterwards. Those are the people you commiserate with when your dog dies. Those are the people that when you have a problem outside of your area of expertise, you ask for help. Those become your people.
100%. I mean, I literally formed a rollerblading group out of one of my friends from that financial independence group. And that, even though the financial independence group no longer meets up, we still have that rollerblading group, 8 years later. And it's something that brings me massive joy. A couple times a month, we get together and go rollerblading, and it doesn't make me more money or whatever, but it makes me feel like a kid. And in the book, what are the things you loved as a kid? As a kid, I loved to rollerblade. And when I rollerblade as a 43-year-old man, I feel like a magical kid again. And bringing that sense of magic into my life through community with other people, it just gives me so much meaning and purpose and happiness in my life.
That's winning. You want to spend as much of your time doing that kind of stuff for the rest of your life. That's winning. 100%. That's it.
Awesome. Well, Jordan, thank you so much for coming on the show. You're very easy to find online. I highly recommend the Earn and Invest podcast. Where are other places people can go to? Obviously, your books, The Purpose Code, is available on Amazon, local booksellers, etc. But for people who want to dive more into your work, where's the best place to send them?
Best place is to go to jordangrumet.com. That's JORDANGRUMET.com. There you can find links to both of my books, The Purpose Code and Taking Stock, as well as all the other places I create content, including the Earn and Invest podcast. I have a Substack. I've been writing more for Psychology Today. So all of those things are linked at jordangrumet.com.
Awesome. Well, thanks for coming on the show. And when you get the next book out, we'll have you back on again.
Thank you so much for having me.